I never thought flowers could get me into trouble. In fact, I thought flowers, roses to be exact, were the most harmless, peaceful thing anyone could have in their yard. But looking back now, I realize this whole nightmare started with just one simple decision: planting roses for my mother. You see, my mom loved roses. She wasn't some professional gardener or anything like that, but she had this way of making even the simplest flowers look magical. Growing up, our little backyard smelled of roses every spring. When she passed away last year, I felt this emptiness inside me that no words could really describe. It wasn't just grief, it was silence, like something in my life had gone completely still. One evening, after weeks of crying and sleepless nights, I looked at the patch of bare soil in front of my house and thought, Mom would have planted roses here. And that's when I decided. I went to the nursery, picked out 6 rose bushes, red, pink, and white, and spent the entire weekend digging, planting, and watering. My hands got scratched, my knees ached, but for the first time since the funeral, I felt closer to her. Every morning after that, I would step outside with my coffee, stand by those roses, and whisper a little good morning to my mom. I know it sounds silly, but it healed me in ways I didn't expect. But then came her, the president of our HOA. Let's just call her Karen, because honestly, that's what she was, in every possible way. She was the kind of person who'd measure the height of your grass with the ruler, or leave angry notes if your trash can sat outside 5 minutes too long. Most of the neighbors tolerated her because they didn't want trouble, but I had barely spoken to her before this. That changed the day she stopped in front of my house. I was trimming the edges around the rose bed when I heard her heels clicking on the sidewalk. She stood there with her arms crossed, oversized sunglasses covering her eyes. "Are those roses?" she asked, in a tone like I had just planted a field of poisonous weeds. "Yes," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "I planted them for my mom. She passed away last year." Karen tilted her head like she was trying to show sympathy, but her words betrayed her. "Well, I'm sorry for your loss, but roses aren't permitted in front yards under the HOA guidelines. Only approved shrubs and ground cover." I froze. "What do you mean not permitted? They're just flowers. Half the neighborhood has flowers." "Not roses," she snapped. "Roses are considered unapproved landscaping. They attract pests, they're high maintenance, and they don't match the aesthetic of the community." I wanted to laugh. Did she seriously just say roses don't match the aesthetic? "Karen," I said, as calmly as I could, "these roses are for my mother. They're not hurting anyone. They look beautiful." She pulled out a little notepad. Yes, she actually carried one, and scribbled something down. "I'm just letting you know, you'll be receiving a notice. I suggest you remove them before it gets official." And with that, she strutted away. I stood there, dumbfounded. My roses? Against the rules? It sounded ridiculous. Surely this was just some personal vendetta she had against me, or maybe she was just bored and wanted to exercise her authority. Either way, I wasn't going to rip out the only thing that gave me peace after my mom's death. The next day, I noticed a couple of neighbors slowing down their walk to admire the roses. One of them, Mrs. Peterson from across the street, even said, "They're lovely, dear. Your mother would have been proud." That made my heart swell. See, people like them. But just when I started thinking maybe Karen was bluffing, the letter arrived. It was an official HOA violation notice. Bold letters across the top. Unapproved landscaping. Remove immediately. It also came with the warning. Failure to comply within 10 days will result in fines. My hands shook as I held that paper. A fine for planting flowers? I felt this mixture of anger and disbelief boiling inside me. Was this really happening? I decided to ignore it at first. Maybe if I didn't react, she'd realize how petty it was and move on. But deep down, I knew Karen. She wasn't the type to let things go. The following week, I caught her again, standing in front of my house, this time with another HOA board member. They were pointing at my roses like they were inspecting a crime scene. I marched outside. "Excuse me," I said, my voice sharper than before. "Why are you here again?" Karen turned, fake smile plastered across her face. "Oh, just routine inspection, making sure all residents are compliant." I crossed my arms. "They're roses, flowers. What exactly is the problem?" The board member, a quiet man who barely looked me in the eye, muttered, "Guidelines, ma'am. Page 14, Section B. Roses not approved." "That's insane," I shot back. "This is my yard, my property, and these roses are for my mother. You can't just dictate what flowers I plant." Karen leaned closer, lowering her sunglasses to reveal cold, piercing eyes. "Actually, we can. You signed the HOA agreement when you bought this house. Rules are rules. If you don't like it, maybe you should live somewhere else." That line cut deep. The audacity of telling me to leave my home because of a few flowers? I wanted to scream, but instead, I forced myself to stay calm. "We'll see about that," I said, before turning back into my house. But inside, my heart was racing. I had just picked a fight with the most powerful and most ruthless woman in the neighborhood. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept staring out the window at those roses, glowing faintly under the streetlight. They looked so innocent, so pure, and yet they were now at the center of a war I never wanted. I whispered to the roses, as if speaking to my mom, "I'm not taking you out. I don't care what she says. I'll fight for you." And at that moment, I had no idea how ugly this fight was about to get. Because the next letter I received wasn't just another warning. It was a fine. When I opened the mailbox that morning, I knew right away something was wrong. The envelope wasn't like the others. It had that bold HOA logo stamped in the corner, almost like a warning sign. My stomach dropped before I even tore it open. Inside was a neatly typed letter with just one sentence in bold across the top. "You are hereby fined $250 for violation of HOA landscaping guidelines." $250 for planting roses? I stood there in my driveway holding the letter, my hands shaking with anger. It felt so unfair. I wasn't some irresponsible neighbor with broken down cars in the yard or trash piling up. I wasn't disturbing anyone. I had planted roses, roses for my mother. I walked back inside, slammed the letter on the kitchen counter, and just stared at it. My mind was racing. Do I pay this? Do I ignore it? Do I fight it? That evening, when my neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, came by with her little dog, I showed her the fine. Her face twisted with disgust. "They fined you for those roses? Are they insane?" she said, shaking her head. "I told you before, they're beautiful. Karen has nothing better to do with her time." I sighed. "It's not about the flowers, is it? It's about control." Mrs. Peterson nodded. "Exactly. She likes to scare people. Most just pay the fines because they don't want trouble. But if you give in once, she'll keep coming after you." Her words sunk deep into me. I didn't want to give in. I couldn't. Paying the fine would feel like betraying my mom's memory. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to pay. The very next day, I confronted Karen. She was outside, clipboard in hand, walking down the street like she was the queen of the neighborhood. I marched right up to her, holding the letter. "What is this?" I snapped. Karen looked at me with that same fake smile. "That's your fine notice." "For flowers?" I said, my voice rising. "You fined me for planting roses in my own front yard?" She didn't even flinch. "Yes, you're in violation of the guidelines. If you'd like, you can appeal it in writing, but the fine stands until then." "Karen," I said, trying to keep my composure, "these roses aren't just decorations. They're in memory of my mom. She loved roses, and this is how I honor her." Karen's expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said coldly, "but rules are rules. If we allow you to break them, then everyone else will want exceptions, and then this neighborhood will look like chaos." Chaos? She called my roses chaos? I felt a lump forming in my throat. Not sadness, but rage. "Do you even hear yourself? These flowers aren't hurting anyone. They bring me peace, and frankly, most of the neighbors love them." Karen shrugged, clicking her pen. "Then maybe they should petition to change the rules. But until then, you're non-compliant. If you don't pay, additional fines will be added." Her indifference burned me. I wanted to scream, to call her out for the power-hungry tyrant she was, but instead, I turned and walked away. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the fine notice. $250 might not seem like a fortune, but it was the principle of it. Paying meant admitting I was wrong, and I wasn't wrong. I decided to write an appeal. I poured my heart into that letter, explaining about my mom, the meaning of the roses, how they weren't damaging property or disturbing the community. I even attached photos of the roses looking neat and well kept, hoping someone on the board would have a shred of empathy. I mailed it off the next day, and then I waited. Weeks passed. During that time, the roses bloomed more beautifully than ever before. Every morning I'd stand by them with my coffee, trying to remind myself why I was fighting. They weren't just flowers. They were love, memory, healing. But Karen wasn't done. One afternoon, I came home from work and found another letter taped to my front door. This one was worse. Notice of noncompliance. Immediate action required. Failure to remove unapproved roses will result in escalating fines and potential legal action. My heart pounded as I read the words, legal action. Over roses? It felt surreal. That evening, I spotted Karen outside again, chatting with two other board members. I couldn't hold it in any longer. I stormed across the street. "Are you serious right now?" I demanded, waving the notice. "Legal action? Over flowers?" Karen gave me that condescending smirk I'd come to hate. "We tried to warn you. You refused to comply. This is the process." One of the board members, a man named Greg, spoke up quietly, almost apologetically. "It's nothing personal. We just have to enforce the rules." "Nothing personal?" I laughed bitterly. "This is the most personal thing you could do. You're attacking my way of remembering my mother. How would you feel if someone told you your memorial for a loved one was illegal?" For the first time, Karen's expression faded, but only for a second. Then she straightened her shoulders and said, "If you continue to resist, you'll leave us no choice but to escalate further. The rules are clear." I glared at her. "Go ahead, escalate. I'm not ripping out those roses." And I meant it. But deep down, I was scared because I knew what came next wouldn't just be another letter. And sure enough, I was right. A week later, there was a loud knock at my door. When I opened it, two uniformed police officers were standing on my porch. The knock on my door that evening wasn't just loud. It was the kind of knock that makes your stomach twist. When I opened it, there they were, two police officers, standing tall in their uniforms, their cruiser lights flashing faintly behind them. For a second, I thought I must be dreaming. "Ma'am," the taller officer said politely, "we've had a call from your homeowners association. They claim you're refusing to comply with community guidelines." I blinked at him in disbelief. "Wait, Are you telling me you're here because of my roses? The shorter officer glanced at his clipboard. They reported multiple violations, non-compliance with notices, and possible disorderly conduct with HOA board members. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My voice shook as I answered. Disorderly conduct? I haven't done anything. All I did was plant flowers for my late mother. The taller officer softened his tone. Look, we're not here to arrest anyone. We're just here because they asked us to make contact and mediate. Can we come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, I showed them the stack of notices, fines, and my appeal letter that the HOA had completely ignored. The officers looked through them, exchanging glances. One of them sighed. Honestly, this isn't the kind of thing we should even be called out for. But since they reported it, we're obligated to check in. Check in? I said bitterly. They're trying to intimidate me with the police over roses. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? The shorter officer gave me a sympathetic look. We get it, believe me. We see this kind of thing more than you'd think. HOAs can be aggressive. Aggressive. That was the polite way of putting it. Just then, there was movement outside my window. I peeked through the blinds. And, of course, there she was, Karen, standing across the street with her arms folded, watching like some self-appointed queen, making sure her orders were being carried out. My blood boiled. I turned back to the officers. She called you, didn't she? She's the one who reported me. They didn't answer directly, but the look on their faces said everything. I marched outside, the officers following close behind. Karen smirked as I approached. Well, she said, I see the police are here. Maybe now you'll take this seriously. I exploded. Are you insane? You called the police on me over roses. Roses for my mother? Karen's tone was icy calm, but her words cut deep. You've had multiple warnings. You refuse to comply. This is what happens when residents think they're above the rules. One of the officers stepped in. Ma'am, he said firmly to Karen, we've spoken to her. This is a civil matter, not a criminal one. Please don't misuse emergency services for HOA disputes. For the first time, Karen's face faltered. She didn't like being called out in front of neighbors. And believe me, by now a small crowd had gathered, people peeking from porches, pretending to water their lawns, watching every second. I turned to the crowd and raised my voice. She called the police because I planted roses for my mom. Is this the kind of neighborhood we live in? A murmur rippled through the group. Some neighbors looked uncomfortable, others whispered to each other, and I could see Karen's jaw clench. The taller officer cleared his throat. Here's the deal. We're leaving because this isn't a police matter. But if this continues, you should consider getting legal advice. Document everything. Keep records. Because if it escalates to court, that will matter. With that, they left. And just like that, I was standing in the middle of my yard. Roses blooming behind me, Karen glaring in front of me, and my neighbors silently judging from the sidelines. When I finally went inside, I collapsed on the couch. My hands were still trembling. Police. Actual police officers. I couldn't decide if I was more angry or humiliated. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen's smug face and the flashing red and blue lights outside my house. I knew this was only the beginning. The very next morning, another notice arrived. This time, it wasn't just a fine. It was a threat. Failure to pay outstanding fines will result in a lien against your property. A lien on my house. My home. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the paper with tears burning in my eyes. They weren't just trying to make me remove the roses anymore. They were trying to break me, financially and emotionally. But something inside me shifted that morning. Up until then, I'd been playing defense, reacting to whatever Karen threw at me. But as I looked at that notice, I realized if I didn't fight back, she'd win. And if she won, I'd never forgive myself. So I grabbed my phone, started snapping pictures of every letter, every notice, every fine. I photographed my roses from every angle, showing how neat and well kept they were. I even filmed a video of myself explaining the situation, just so I'd have evidence of the harassment. Later that day, I walked across the street to talk to Mrs. Peterson. She looked at the notice and shook her head in disbelief. This is going too far. They can't just bully you like this. Maybe they can. Maybe that's how HOAs work. She put a hand on my shoulder. Then you'll have to fight them, and you won't be alone. Her words gave me strength. For the first time, I realized maybe I wasn't the only one who saw through Karen's act. Maybe others in the neighborhood felt the same way, but were too scared to speak up. That night, I sat at my desk drafting a plan. I would gather support, I would collect signatures, I would expose the harassment for what it really was. But deep down, I knew this wouldn't just be a neighborhood squabble anymore, because the HOA had threatened my home, and I was prepared to take this all the way to court if I had to. And little did I know, that's exactly where this war was headed. The notice about the lien sat on my kitchen counter like a ticking time bomb. Every time I walked past it, my chest tightened. They weren't bluffing anymore. They wanted to take my house over flowers. But I wasn't about to let that happen. The officer's words echoed in my head. Document everything, keep records, get legal advice. So that's exactly what I started doing. I bought a big binder from the store and began stuffing it with every piece of paper the HOA had sent me. Violation letters, fines, threats. I slipped photos into plastic sleeves, pictures of my roses, neat and beautiful, not a single weed in sight. I even printed out screenshots of text messages Karen had sent me after one heated confrontation. Things like, "You're setting a bad example for the community. We will not tolerate defiance. And the worst, the roses will come out one way or another." That one chilled me. The more evidence I collected, the angrier I got. But anger wasn't enough. I needed support. So I started knocking on doors. The first person I went to was Mrs. Peterson, of course. She didn't hesitate. "You have my support, dear. Those roses are the best thing that's happened to this block in years. Karen's just jealous." She signed a written statement for me right then and there. Next, I tried the Wilsons 2 houses down. They were younger, kept mostly to themselves. At first, they seemed nervous. "We don't want to get involved," Mr. Wilson said quietly. "Karen, she can make life difficult." I leaned in. "She already has, for me. But next time, it could be you. Today, it's my roses. Tomorrow, it could be your porch lights or your mailbox or your kids' bikes on the lawn." That struck a nerve. Mrs. Wilson looked at her husband, then back at me. "She did threaten us once about our holiday decorations. I'll sign." Slowly, signatures started piling up. Not everyone was brave enough. Some flat out refused. Others closed their doors quickly, terrified of Karen finding out. But little by little, the tide began to turn. One evening, I even held a small gathering in my backyard. About a dozen neighbors showed up. We sat in lawn chairs under the glow of string lights while the roses filled the air with their sweet scent. I told them everything about the fines, the threats, the police. By the time I was done, several more people agreed to stand with me. Of course, word spread, and it didn't take long before Karen found out. The next morning, I woke up to find a fresh notice taped to my door. This one accused me of inciting dissent against the HOA and warned that group gatherings not pre-approved by the board were prohibited. I actually laughed when I read it. They were reaching now, trying anything to shut me up. But inside, I was nervous because with every step I took, they pushed harder. And then came the letter that changed everything. HOA versus my name. Notice of legal proceedings. It was official. They were dragging me to court. My stomach dropped, but a strange sense of determination rose in me, too. If they wanted a fight, then fine. We'd fight in front of a judge. The first thing I did was find a lawyer. His name was Mark, a calm, steady man with graying hair who had clearly dealt with HOA bullies before. When I laid out all my evidence, his eyebrows shot up. He said, "They're way out of line. HOAs can enforce rules, yes, but they can't harass you, they can't misuse the police, and they certainly can't retaliate when you gather community support. This is abusive power." Hearing him say that was like a weight lifting off my chest. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. This was real harassment. Mark helped me organize everything, my binder of documents, witness statements, photos. He even suggested we subpoena HOA financial records to see if Karen had been using fines like mine to pad their budget. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't backing down either. She strutted around the neighborhood like she was untouchable. One afternoon, I overheard her bragging to another board member. "She'll lose. Nobody beats the HOA. The rules are the rules." But I also noticed something else. People were avoiding her. Where neighbors used to nod politely or wave, now they turned away. Some whispered behind her back. Her grip on the community was slipping, and I could feel it. Still, as the court date drew closer, my nerves grew worse. What if the judge sided with her? What if the HOA really did slap a lien on my home? The thought of losing everything because of flowers made me sick to my stomach. The night before court, I couldn't sleep. I sat outside by the roses, the cool night air brushing against my skin, and whispered to my mom again. "Mom, I don't know if I can do this. What if I lose?" A breeze rustled through the petals, and for just a second, I felt calm. Maybe it was just the wind, maybe it was something more, but I took it as her way of saying, "You're stronger than you think." The next morning, I put on my best clothes, clutched my binder of evidence like a lifeline, and walked into that courthouse with my head held high. When I entered the courtroom, Karen was already there, sitting smugly at the plaintiff's table with her lawyers. She looked at me like I was already defeated. But as I sat down across from her, something inside me hardened. This wasn't just about flowers anymore. This was about standing up to bullies, about refusing to be silenced. And when the judge finally walked in and the case began, I had no idea what was about to unfold. Walking into that courtroom felt like stepping into another world. The walls were high, the air heavy, and the rows of benches filled with curious neighbors who had come to watch. I could see Mrs. Peterson in the crowd, giving me an encouraging nod. A few other neighbors who had signed my petition were there too. Their presence gave me strength. On the other side sat Karen. She looked smug, her sharp blazer pressed to perfection, lips curved into that self-satisfied smile I'd grown to hate. Next to her were two HOA board members and their attorney, a slick-looking man who seemed eager to tear me apart. When the judge entered, everyone rose. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept reminding myself, "You're not alone. You have the truth. You have the roses." The proceedings began. The HOA attorney spoke first. His voice was calm but condescending, like he was explaining something to a child. "Your Honor, this case is simple. The defendant knowingly violated HOA landscaping guidelines by planting unapproved rose bushes in her front yard. Despite multiple warnings and fines, she refused to comply. The HOA has no choice but to enforce the rules to maintain community standards." He went on and on about uniformity and aesthetic harmony, painting me as some reckless homeowner who thought she was above the law. Karen nodded along with every word, her arms crossed tightly like she'd already won. When it was my lawyer's turn, he stood tall and steady. "Your Honor, what the HOA has left out is the harassment, the intimidation, and the abuse of power. My client planted roses in memory of her late mother, flowers that harm no one, flowers admired by neighbors. Instead of compassion, the HOA president launched a campaign of fines, threats, and even called the police on her. This case is not about roses. It's about harassment. The judge raised an eyebrow at that. Calling the police over flowers? Yes, Your Honor, and we have evidence. That was my cue. I opened my binder, my hands trembling slightly, and passed it to the bailiff. Page after page was handed to the judge. Violation notices, fine letters, screenshots of Karen's threatening texts, photos of the roses neat and tidy. The judge flipped through them slowly. His face was unreadable, but every now and then I saw the faintest flicker of surprise. Then it was my turn to testify. I stood up, my throat dry, and walked to the witness stand. As I was sworn in, I glanced at Karen. She smirked, as if daring me to speak. I took a deep breath. Your Honor, my mom passed away last year. She loved roses. Planting them in my yard was my way of remembering her, of keeping a piece of her with me. They weren't overgrown. They weren't messy. They were beautiful. Neighbors complimented them. They gave me peace. My voice cracked, but I pushed through. But instead of understanding, the HOA president, I glanced at Karen, treated me like a criminal. She fined me, threatened me, even called the police to my house because of flowers. Do you know how humiliating it is to have officers show up at your door because of flowers? The courtroom was silent except for the sound of my voice. I could see some of the neighbors in the gallery shaking their heads in disbelief. Karen's attorney tried to object. Irrelevant emotional appeal, Your Honor. But the judge held up a hand. Overruled. Continue. I swallowed hard and finished. This isn't about rules. This is about power. About one person abusing their position to intimidate others. And if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone in that neighborhood. When I sat back down, I felt a rush of adrenaline. My hands were cold, but my heart was on fire. Then, it was Karen's turn to testify. She walked to the stand with her chin high, like she was above all of us. Your Honor, she said, her voice sharp. This resident signed the HOA agreement when she moved in. She knew the rules. Roses attract pests. They disrupt the uniform appearance of our community, and they set a bad precedent. If we let one person break the rules, soon everyone will. We'll have chaos. Chaos. She used that word again. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Karen's last name. Are you saying roses are a threat to community harmony? Yes, Karen said firmly. And when she refused to comply, we had to escalate. Escalate how? The judge asked. Karen hesitated. By issuing fines and involving law enforcement when she became confrontational. That was her mistake. My lawyer stood. Your Honor, may I show the court Exhibit C? He held up the screenshots of Karen's texts, including the one that read, "The roses will come out one way or another." The judge's eyes narrowed. Mrs. Karen, did you send these messages? Karen shifted in her seat. Well, yes, but... No further questions, my lawyer said. The damage was done. Karen's confidence cracked. She fumbled through the rest of her testimony, but the smugness was gone. Finally, both sides made closing statements. Karen's attorney repeated that I had violated the rules, plain and simple. My lawyer countered that the HOA was being enforced selectively and maliciously, and that the HOA's actions went far beyond their authority. When the gavel came down, it felt like the sound echoed through my entire body. For weeks, I had been carrying this heavy weight on my shoulders, and suddenly, it was gone. The judge had spoken. I had won. But the real shock wasn't just that I won, it was what came next. As people began filing out of the courtroom, Karen sat frozen in her chair, her face pale and rigid. For the first time, she wasn't in control. She wasn't barking orders or threatening fines. She was just small. I stood up slowly, my knees weak but steady enough to carry me. Mrs. Peterson rushed over and hugged me tight, whispering, "I knew you'd win, sweetheart. I knew it." Behind her, other neighbors gave me supportive nods and even clapped softly. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just my fight, it was everyone's. Karen stormed out of the courtroom without looking at anyone. Her heels clicked furiously on the floor, and her attorney trailed behind her, looking embarrassed. It was a walk of defeat, and I can't lie, it felt good to watch. But the victory wasn't just personal. Within a week, the judge's order set off a chain reaction. The HOA board had an emergency meeting, and word spread quickly. An outside auditor was being brought in to review their finances and conduct. Whispers turned into gossip, and gossip turned into rumors. Some said Karen was using HOA funds for personal expenses. Others claimed she bullied more people than just me, but most were too afraid to speak up before. Not anymore. Suddenly, neighbors who had been silent started sharing their own stories. One man revealed Karen fined him for having his trash can out an hour too early. Another woman said she was threatened with legal action because her kids drew chalk art on the sidewalk. All of us realized just how deep her grip of control had gone. But the court ruling had loosened that grip, and people weren't afraid anymore. 2 weeks later, the HOA held a public election for new board members. I didn't run, but I attended. The community hall was packed, more people than I ever seen show up for anything HOA related. When Karen tried to defend herself, people actually booed. The same people who used to nod and follow her orders now turned their backs. By the end of that night, Karen was voted out as president, replaced by a kinder, fairer neighbor who promised transparency and compassion. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free. And my roses, they bloomed brighter than ever. Every morning I'd sit on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching their petals sway in the breeze. Neighbors would stop by and compliment them, some even asking if I could share cuttings so they could plant roses of their own. What once was a symbol of conflict had become a symbol of hope, community, and resilience. But there was one moment that I'll never forget. About a month after the trial, I was trimming the roses when I noticed Karen walking down the sidewalk. My first instinct was to tense up, to brace for another confrontation, but something was different. Her steps were slower, her shoulders sagged, and when she reached my yard, she stopped. For a moment, she just stared at the roses. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "They are beautiful." I was stunned. No threats, no fines, just honesty. I didn't know if it was an apology or just an admission she couldn't deny anymore. But in that moment, I realized I didn't need her apology. The victory wasn't about making her sorry, it was about reclaiming my peace. I simply nodded and said, "They were my mom's favorite." Karen's eyes flickered with something, regrets maybe, but she didn't say anything more. She walked away quietly, and I knew I'd probably never see her the same way again. Life settled back into rhythm after that. The roses grew taller, neighbors grew closer, and the shadow of fear that had loomed over the community finally lifted. And me? I learned something I'll carry forever. Sometimes standing up for what's right feels impossible. The pressure, the fear, the threats, they make you want to give up. But if you keep going, if you stay true to yourself, the truth has a way of shining through. As I sat one evening, the sunset casting a golden glow over the roses, I whispered to myself, "These are for you, Mom." Because in the end, this was never about the HOA, never about Karen. It was about love. Love that grew, bloomed, and stood tall, even when someone tried to cut it down. And those roses, they weren't just flowers anymore. They were victory. They were freedom. They were his.